Kafka, The Metamorphosis Part 3. Gregor was beside himself. In his anxiety he forgot everything else. "But, sir," he cried, "I will open the door immediately. I will open it." I felt a little ill. A slight giddiness prevented me from getting up. I am still in bed. But I feel better already. I am just getting up. Only a moment's patience. I am not quite so well as I thought. But I am all right, really. How can it be that illness should take one so quickly? Only yesterday I felt quite well, my parents can tell you, and then last evening I had a slight symptom. They must have noticed it. Why didn't I let them know at the office? But then, one always thinks one will be able to get rid of an illness without staying at home. Please, sir, spare my parents. The complaints you made just now are really without any foundation. No one has even suggested them before. Perhaps you have not seen the last orders I sent in. I will leave on the 8 o'clock train. These few moments of rest have done me a great deal of good. Please don't stay, sir. I shall be at the office immediately, and please inform the director of what has happened and put in a good word for me. And while Gregor hastily cried these words, scarcely realizing what he said, he had, with an ease due to his previous exertions, approached the chest of drawers, against which he now tried to raise himself. He wanted to open the door. He wanted to be seen and to speak with the manager. He was curious to know what impression he would make on these people, who were so imperiously demanding his presence. If he frightened them, that would be reassuring, for he would stop being cross-questioned and be left in peace. If they took everything quietly, then he, too, need not be alarmed. And if he hurried, he might still catch the 8 o'clock train. The chest was polished, and Gregor slipped on it several times, but, by a supreme effort, he managed to get upright. He paid no attention to the pains in his stomach, though they were hurting him. He let himself drop forward onto the top of a nearby chair, and clung there with his little legs. Then, finding himself master of his body, he stayed very quiet in order to listen to what the manager had to say. "Did you understand a word of what he said?" the manager asked the parents. "Is he trying to make fools of us?" "Good heavens," cried the mother, already in tears. "Perhaps he is seriously ill, and here we are torturing him all this while." "Greta! Greta," she called. "Mother," cried the daughter from the other side. They were separated by Gregor's room. "Fetch a doctor immediately. Gregor is ill. A doctor, quickly. Did you hear him speak?" "It was an animal's voice," said the manager. After the cries of the women, his voice seemed curiously gentle. "Anna, Anna," shouted the father through the hall into the kitchen, clapping his hands. "Get a locksmith, quick." And already the two young girls, how could his sister have dressed so soon, ran along the corridor with rustling skirts and opened the front door. No one heard the door close. No doubt it had been left open, as is the custom in houses to which a great misfortune has come. However, Gregor had become calmer. Doubtless they had not understood his words, though they had seemed clear enough to him, clearer, indeed, than the first time. Perhaps his ears were becoming more accustomed to the sounds. But at least they were obliged to realize that his case was not normal, and they were ready now to help him. The assurance and resourcefulness with which the first steps had been taken comforted him considerably. He felt himself integrated into human society once again, and without differentiating between them, he hoped for great and surprising things from the locksmith and the doctor. To clear his throat for the decisive conversation, which he would have to hold soon, he coughed a little, but as quietly as possible, for he feared that even his cough might not sound human. Meanwhile, in the next room, it had become quiet. Perhaps his parents were sitting at table in a secret conference with The manager, perhaps everyone was leaning against the door, listening. Gregor made his way slowly toward it with the chair. Then he abandoned the chair and flung himself at the door, holding himself erect against the woodwork, for the bottom of his feet secreted a sticky substance, and he rested a moment from his efforts. After this, he tried to turn the key in the lock with his mouth. Unfortunately, it seemed he had no proper teeth. How could he take hold of the key? In compensation, instead of teeth he possessed a pair of very strong mandibles and succeeded in seizing the key in the lock, regardless of the pain this caused him. A brownish liquid flowed out of his mouth, spread over the lock, and dropped to the floor. "Listen," said the manager in the next room. "He is just turning the key." This was valuable encouragement for Gregor. He would have liked his father, his mother, everybody, to start calling to him, "Courage, Gregor, go on, push hard." And, with the idea that everyone was following his efforts with passionate attention, he clutched the key with all the power of his jaws until he was nearly unconscious. Following the progress of the turning key, he twisted himself around the lock, hanging on by his mouth, and, clinging to the key, pressed it down again, whenever it slipped, with all the weight of his body. The clear click of the lock, as it snapped back, awoke Gregor from his momentary coma. "I have dispensed with the locksmith," he thought, and sighed and leaned his head against the handle to open one panel of the double doors completely. This method, the only possible one, prevented the others from seeing him for some time, even with the door open. Still erect, he had to grope his way round the door with great caution in order not to spoil his entry by falling flat on his back. So he was concentrating toward this end, with all his attention absorbed by the maneuver, when he heard the manager utter a sonorous "Oh," was the roaring of the wind produces, and saw him, he was just by the door, press his hand over his open mouth and slowly stagger back, as if some invisible, an intensely powerful force were driving him from the spot. His mother, who, despite the presence of the manager, was standing by, with her hair in curlers, still disordered by sleep, began to look at the father, clasping her hands. Then she made 2 steps toward Gregor, and fell backward into the family circle in the midst of a confusion of skirts, which spread around her, while her face, falling on her breast, was concealed from sight. The father clenched his fists with a menacing air, as if to beat Gregor back into his room. Then he looked around the dining room in perplexity, covered his eyes with his hand, and wept with great sobs, which shook his powerful chest. Gregor did not enter the room. He stood against the closed half of the double doors, allowing only a part of his body to be seen, while, above, he turned his head to one side to see what would happen. Meanwhile, it had grown much lighter. On either side of the street a part of the long, dark building opposite could clearly be seen. It was a hospital, with regular windows startlingly pitting its facade. It was still raining, but in great separate drops which fell to the ground, one by one. The breakfast crockery was spread all over the table, for breakfast was the most important meal of the day for Gregor's father. He would prolong it for hours while he read various newspapers. On the wall hung a photograph of Gregor in lieutenant's uniform, taken while he was in military service. He was smiling. His hand lay on the hilt of his sword. By his expression, he seemed happy to be alive. By his gesture, he appeared to command respect for his rank. The living room door was ajar, and as the front door was also open, the balcony and the first steps of the stairway could just be seen. "Now," said Gregor, and he realized that he was the only one to have kept calm, "now I will get dressed, collect my samples, and go." Will you let me go? Surely you can now see, sir, that I am not obstinate, that I do mean to work. Commercial traveling is tiresome, I admit, but without it I cannot live." "Where are you going, sir?" "To the office." "Yes?" "Will you give them a faithful account of what has happened? After all, anyone might find for a moment that they were incapable of resuming their work, but that's just a good opportunity to review the work they have been doing, and to bear in mind that, once the obstacle is removed, they will be able to return with twice the heart. I owe so much to the director, as you know very well. I have my parents and my sister to consider. I am in an awkward position, but I shall return to work. Only, please do not make things more difficult for me, they are hard enough as it is. Take my part at the office. I know only too well they don't like travelers. They think we earn our money too easily. That we lead too grand a life. I realize that the present situation doesn't encourage the removal of this prejudice, but you, sir, the manager, can judge the circumstances better than the rest of the staff, better than the director himself. Though this is between ourselves, for in his executive capacity he is often easily misled by an employee's prejudice. You know quite well that the traveler, who is hardly ever in the office the whole year round, is often the victim of scandal, of a chance, undeserved complaint against which he is powerless to defend himself, for he does not even know that he is being accused. He only learns of it as he returns, exhausted, at the end of his trip, when the sad consequences of an affair, whose circumstances he can no longer recall, painfully confront him. Please, sir, don't leave me without a word to show that you think all this at least a little reasonable.